What if I told you that one man's story could be read not only in trophies and championships, but also in quiet moments of failure, discipline, and the simple rhythm of practice? Tonight, we drift back into the life of Michael Jordan, not the larger-than-life icon we see on highlight reels, but the boy who once dreamed in the soft Carolina evenings, the young man who found comfort in the sound of a bouncing ball, and the figure who would slowly, step by step, change the language of sport forever. If you'd like to hear more bedtime history journeys like this, please consider tapping like or subscribing. It helps more than you can imagine. I also love seeing where you're listening from, your city, country, or even just what time it is where you are. It's like weaving a global tapestry of listeners all connected through these stories. Now, dim the lights. Maybe let a candle or soft lamp glow nearby, take a deep breath. Maybe turn on the fan, sink into your pillow, and let's begin this peaceful journey together. This is not the story of dazzling dunks or roaring crowds. Instead, we will wander through the quieter corridors of Michael Jordan's life. We will linger on the gentle details, the wooden backboard in his childhood yard, the evenings spent practicing under fading light, the simple joys and the steady struggles that shaped him. Michael Jordan's story is one of greatness, yes, but also of ordinary moments that mirror our own lives. Mornings of doubt, afternoons of persistence, and nights where dreams seem distant yet still possible. Over the course of this series, we'll explore his journey slowly, like turning the pages of an old diary, chapter by chapter, allowing the details to settle softly in our minds. We'll begin with the first steps of a boy who loved the game of basketball, long before the world ever knew his name. Close your eyes and drift back in time to a warm evening in North Carolina in the early 1960s. The air is thick with the smell of pine trees, the faint hum of cicadas rising into the dusk, and the quiet rhythm of neighborhood life. In the town of Wilmington, children play in driveways, radios hum gently from open windows, and families gather in living rooms to wind down from the day. It was here, in this quiet, unassuming place, that Michael Jeffrey Jordan began his story. Long before stadiums, championships, and worldwide fame, there was simply a boy named Mike, surrounded by family, community, and the steady patterns of daily life. Michael was born on February 17, 1963, the fourth of 5 children to James and Dolores Jordan. Their home was modest, filled not with wealth or luxury, but with warmth and structure. His father, James, was a man of discipline and practical lessons. He loved tinkering with projects, working with his hands, and guiding his children to do the same. His mother, Dolores, balanced that discipline with care, faith, and high expectations. She valued education and responsibility, and she expected her children to approach life with seriousness as well as gratitude. Together, they created a household that was alive with activity and filled with love. The Jordan home was rarely quiet. With 5 children under one roof, there were constant sounds, siblings talking and teasing, the shuffle of games being played, the clink of dishes in the kitchen. Evenings might be filled with the soft shuffle of cards at the table, television shows murmuring in the background, or the rhythm of a ball bouncing outside on the cracked driveway. Though ordinary in appearance, these small moments shaped Michael's earliest sense of the world. Young Michael was restless, full of energy and playfulness. He competed with his siblings in nearly everything: board games, foot races, games of catch in the yard. Losing never sat well with him, even in childhood, and he often found himself frustrated when he fell short. His parents would gently remind him that effort mattered as much as results, that persistence would bring growth. While these lessons may not have sunk in immediately, they quietly formed the bedrock of his character. His father especially loved baseball, and it was often baseball that drew the two of them together. Afternoons might be spent tossing a ball back and forth, the leather gloves snapping softly with each catch, the rhythm of the game creating a bond of trust between father and son. Michael enjoyed these sessions not just for the sport, but for the closeness they created, the unspoken encouragement hidden in every pitch and swing. At school, Michael was not yet remarkable. He was smaller than some of his peers, and his boundless energy sometimes got in the way of his studies. Yet he was also charming, curious, and lively. Teachers noticed his quick smile and playful nature, even if it sometimes tested the limits of classroom patience. He blended in as one child among many, never yet marked for the greatness that lay ahead. Sundays brought church, where the Jordan family joined their community in pews filled with neighbors and friends. Hymns rose through the sanctuary, voices carrying the same values his parents reinforced at home: perseverance, humility, faith, and patience. For a boy like Michael, these gatherings were less about grandeur and more about familiarity. They were simply part of the weekly rhythm, but their influence, of being part of something larger, of grounding life in shared values, remained. The competitive spark inside him was most visible at home with his siblings. Larry, his older brother, became one of his fiercest challengers. In the driveway, with a worn ball and a makeshift hoop, they would play one-on-one games. The matches often ended in Michael's defeat, and though he hated losing, these small contests quietly planted in him the hunger to improve. He didn't yet have the height, the polished skill, or the reputation, but he had determination, and each loss carved deeper into him a resolve to come back stronger. The wider world of the 1960s and 70s was shifting in profound ways, but for a child in Wilmington, life revolved around the familiar. He knew the smell of fried food from diners, the chatter of neighbors leaning over fences, the sound of a car starting in the early morning. These details, small as they were, filled his days with a sense of place and belonging. He loved games of all kinds. Whether it was marbles, cards, or the simplest competitions, Michael played with intensity. His siblings often teased him about how seriously he took everything. Disappointment hit him hard when he lost, but over time his parents taught him to see those moments differently. Not as failures, but as lessons. This reframing, this idea that setbacks could be useful, would later define much of his career. By the time he approached his teenage years, Michael was beginning to imagine himself as more than just another boy in the neighborhood. Baseball still held his father's heart, but basketball began to tug more and more at his own. The echo of a bouncing ball, the swish of a shot through a net, the freedom of the court, all of it called to him. He wasn't yet the tall, dominant athlete the world would know. He was still a boy, smaller than many of his peers, with dreams bigger than his body could yet carry. And so, the story of Michael Jordan's earliest years is not one of fame, but of foundation. It is about family dinners, chores, laughter with siblings, Sunday services, and backyard games. It is about learning resilience through play and patience through loss. These ordinary rhythms created the roots from which greatness would grow. As night settled over Wilmington, the hum of cicadas filled the air, and a young boy drifted to sleep. His sneakers lay by the bedside, untied and worn from the day's play. Tomorrow would bring another round of games, another lesson, another chance to dream. Long before the championships, before the applause of millions, there was this: the quiet of a North Carolina evening and the beginnings of a boy who would one day change the game forever. The story of Michael Jordan's childhood flows naturally into his school years, where the routines of classrooms, playgrounds, and small local gyms began to shape him further. In many ways, these were ordinary years, the years of homework, schoolyard games, and afternoons spent with friends. Yet within these simple rhythms, the first sparks of competition began to take form, small embers that would later grow into a fire known around the world. In Wilmington, the days often began with the steady pattern of morning routines. Children gathered books into satchels, mothers called out reminders from doorways, and the streets filled with the footsteps of students walking to school. Michael, with his untied sneakers and restless energy, was among them. He was not yet tall, nor was he known for greatness. At that age, he blended into the crowd, another child navigating the small dramas of childhood, tests, friendships, games, and dreams not yet spoken aloud. Classrooms carried the scent of chalk dust, the squeak of pencils, and the occasional hum of a fan turning lazily against the heat. Michael sat among his peers, his mind quick but often distracted by thoughts of play. He was energetic, sometimes impatient, a child who found himself more at home in the open air than in the confines of four walls. His teachers saw potential, but they also saw restlessness. He was eager to laugh, eager to move, and eager to compete in whatever form that took. At recess, his energy found its outlet. The schoolyard was alive with games: tag, marbles, kickball, and the ever-present basketball. Though smaller than some of the other boys, Michael's speed and determination gave him an edge. He wanted to win, and he wanted to win every time. His friends soon learned that playing against him meant playing against relentless energy. Even in those earliest contests, losing gnawed at him, and victory, however small, thrilled him. Basketball, though, was not yet his sole focus. He played baseball with equal passion, encouraged by his father, and enjoyed nearly any sport that allowed him to move, to measure himself against others. The neighborhood courts and fields became his true classrooms, places where he tested limits and absorbed lessons in ways no textbook could offer. Still, school remained important, and his mother made sure of it. Dolores Jordan insisted that education was the key to opportunity, and she would not allow her children to neglect their studies. Homework came before play, chores before games. Michael sometimes resisted, as many children do, but her steady guidance shaped his habits, teaching him that effort and discipline extended beyond the court or the field. As he grew older, he began to face the reality that not every game would end in his favor. Against older and bigger boys, he sometimes struggled. On afternoons when he lost, he returned home with quiet frustration, replaying moments in his mind. Yet instead of walking away, he went back the next day determined to try again. Each defeat planted a seed of resilience, small but steady, that would later define his career. High school brought sharper challenges. Laney High School in Wilmington became the next stage of his journey. Walking into those halls, Michael was still not the towering figure we imagine today. He was shorter than many of his peers, and in basketball terms, that mattered. Coaches and classmates alike often overlooked him, assuming others carried more promise. For a boy who already felt the sting of competition, these judgments cut deeply. The most famous of these moments came when he was cut from the varsity basketball team during his sophomore year. The roster filled with taller, older players, while Michael was left to play junior varsity. For many, this would have been the end of ambition, a moment of discouragement strong enough to dim the dream. But for Michael, it was something else. It was fuel. Night after night, he returned to practice with renewed energy. On the junior varsity team, he excelled, not simply because of talent, but because of sheer determination. He poured himself into the game, improving his skills, sharpening his focus, and learning the patience required to grow. Every game, every practice became an opportunity to prove, if not to the world, then at least to himself, that he belonged. At the same time, his life outside of sports carried on with the normalcy of adolescence. He went to classes, laughed with friends, teased his siblings, and navigated the small triumphs and struggles of teenage life. There were dances, school projects, and quiet evenings at home with family. His story at this stage was not one of glamour, but of ordinariness, colored by determination hiding beneath the surface. By the time he grew into his later high school years, the persistence began to show results. A late growth spurt added inches to his frame, and with it, his skills became harder to ignore. Coaches who once overlooked him now began to see the spark of something more. Yet even as recognition grew, his memory of being cut, of being told he wasn't ready, never left him. It stayed with him as a reminder, not of failure, but of the need to persist. These school years, then, can be seen not as the glamorous beginnings of a legend, but as the slow shaping of character. They were years of study, of competition, of disappointment, and of small victories. They were years of chores at home, of laughter at school, of quiet walks back after games, sneakers worn down but determination renewed. In these years, Michael Jordan became not yet the legend, but the learner, learning how to fall and how to rise again. And when the evenings came, Wilmington settled into its quiet rhythms once more. Families gathered around dinner tables, radios hummed with music and news, and the cicadas sang their endless songs in the trees. Somewhere in that stillness, a young boy dribbled a ball in the driveway, each bounce echoing softly into the night. The game was not yet his world, but already it was becoming the language through which he understood life. There is a certain quiet beauty in remembering beginnings, especially when those beginnings were not easy. For Michael Jordan, the story of becoming the most recognizable athlete in the world did not start with effortless success. Instead, it began with challenges, disappointments, and slow lessons that would eventually shape him into the determined young man who stood out in the world of basketball. In the soft light of the late 1970s, the world around young Michael was calm and unhurried compared to today. He grew up in Wilmington, North Carolina, a city not overly large, where neighborhoods held onto a sense of community. The houses were modest, children played outdoors until dusk, and the warm southern air carried with it the faint scent of pine and salt from the nearby coast. Michael was not yet the towering figure we imagine today. As a teenager, he was smaller than many of his peers, his body not yet stretched into its later athletic form. He was eager, but in those early years he was still learning how to balance desire with patience. The world had not yet opened its stage to him. His family life gave him both comfort and challenge. His father, James, was a steady influence, someone who valued discipline and hard work. His mother, Dolores, carried a quiet strength, ensuring that her children not only chased after dreams, but also respected the values of humility and faith. These household lessons, repeated over dinner tables and family conversations, were just as important as anything he learned on a basketball court. And yet, like many teenagers, Michael longed to prove himself. He wanted to stand out, to be seen, and to be chosen. It was on the high school courts of Laney High that these desires would collide with one of his earliest struggles. The story is familiar to many by now, but still worth retelling. Not with drama, but with quiet reflection. As a sophomore, Michael tried out for the varsity basketball team. His hopes were high, his energy restless. But when the list was posted, his name was missing. The varsity coach had chosen others. Michael was placed instead on the junior varsity team, a disappointment that stung deeply at the time. The moment might have ended another teenager's pursuit. Rejection can be heavy, especially for someone so young, when self-belief is fragile. But for Michael, this absence from the list became a turning point. Instead of walking away, he leaned into the struggle. On the junior varsity team, he threw himself into the game with an intensity that began to turn heads. Evenings would find him in the gym long after others had gone home, practicing free throws, running drills, pushing his body to its limits. It was not glamorous work. The sound of a bouncing ball echoing through an empty gym has a lonely quality. But for Michael, it was music. It was a rhythm he trusted, one that carried him forward. Those who watched him during these years began to notice a transformation. Coaches saw the hunger, teammates saw the relentless focus, and slowly, his frame began to grow, stretching taller, gaining strength. His skills sharpened with each month, until what once looked like disappointment now looked like preparation. There is something universally human in this stage of his journey. We often imagine greatness as a straight path upward, but Michael's story reminds us that the road can begin with being overlooked, underestimated, or even dismissed. The high school years were not yet about championships or glory. They were about persistence. They were about the quiet, unseen hours of work that most people would never know about. At Laney High, Michael's presence on the junior varsity team did more than just shape his skills. It gave him the room to experiment, to lead, and to dominate in a smaller arena. He scored high numbers in games, thrilling crowds of students and parents. Each performance added to his confidence, even as he still remembered the sting of not making varsity. By the following year, the growth was undeniable. His height had increased, his abilities had sharpened, and the varsity team no longer seemed out of reach. Coaches could see it, his family could see it, and most importantly, Michael himself had begun to understand that setbacks could be fuel. In telling this story, we often picture the young boy looking up at the varsity list with disappointment in his eyes. But perhaps it is also useful to picture him later that evening, returning to the court, picking up the ball, and beginning again. The sound of sneakers on the hardwood, the steady repetition of shots taken in solitude. These are not dramatic images, but they are the quiet foundations of success. As Michael grew into his later teenage years, his reputation spread beyond his high school. Local newspapers began to mention his performances. Coaches from nearby colleges started to take notice. But in these early stages, what stands out most is not yet fame or recruitment, but resilience. It was resilience born of disappointment, nurtured by long hours of practice, and carried forward by a belief that being overlooked was not the end of the story. His family supported him through these years in ways that were both gentle and firm. His mother often spoke of education and responsibility, reminding him that basketball could be taken away at any time, but learning and values could not. His father encouraged his competitive spirit, sometimes in small family games of basketball in the backyard, sometimes simply in how he pushed his children to give their best. The backyard hoop, simple as it was, became another training ground. Michael would practice there endlessly, with his siblings sometimes joining, sometimes watching. It was not the polished environment of a professional court, but it was enough. Each shot, each jump, each playful challenge between brothers layered onto his growth. By the time his high school years drew to a close, Michael Jordan was no longer simply another teenager in Wilmington. He was emerging as someone different, taller, stronger, and marked by an unmistakable drive. Yet what made these years remarkable was not just his athletic rise, but how much of it was forged in quiet perseverance, in nights of solitude, in the embrace of family, and in the discipline of believing that rejection was not final. These were the years when dreams still felt distant, when the roar of crowds was only imagined, and when the work was done largely unseen. And perhaps that is why this part of the story feels so fitting for nights like this. It reminds us that greatness often begins in silence, in small gyms, in backyards, in moments when no one else is watching. And so, as we close this chapter, it is worth remembering that Michael Jordan's greatness did not spring forth fully formed. It was carved slowly, through struggle and disappointment, through resilience and practice, through family and faith. The boy who did not make the varsity team became the young man who was impossible to ignore. His dreams had begun to take root, quietly, patiently, the way many of the most enduring dreams often do. And now, with these early struggles behind him, the road was beginning to open toward college, where the stage would grow larger and the world would begin to take notice. But that is a story for another night. In the quiet heart of North Carolina, long before the roar of professional arenas, Michael Jordan stepped onto a different kind of stage. The year was 1981, and the young man from Wilmington arrived at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, a place where red brick buildings stood beneath wide oak trees, and the rhythms of student life moved at a slower, more measured pace. Here, basketball was not merely a pastime. It was part of the air itself, woven into the traditions of the campus. The gym echoed not just with the bounce of a ball, but with the spirit of those who came before. For Jordan, this was a new chapter, one of discovery, growth, and a quiet sharpening of his craft. Life at Chapel Hill in the early 1980s had a certain stillness. Students carried books across the quad, the sound of cicadas filled the humid evenings, and basketball practice sessions stretched into the late hours, when the light of the gym shone like a lantern in the night. Jordan, though immensely talented, was still just one among many, learning, listening, and gradually finding his voice. Those first practices under Coach Dean Smith were steady and deliberate. Smith was a man known for his calm authority and his belief in teamwork over stardom. In his system, no player stood above the rest. It was an environment that asked for patience, for trust, for an understanding of the game that went beyond points scored. And Jordan, though eager to prove himself, had to learn the virtue of restraint. Over time, the campus became a backdrop to his personal transformation. Mornings often began with lectures and readings, afternoons with drills and scrimmages. The days were long, yet Jordan carried himself with a quiet discipline. He was not yet the man the world would come to know, but rather a student in both senses of the word. One learning history, culture, and science in the classroom, and another learning movement, timing, and resilience on the court. The most famous moment of his college years came early, the 1982 NCAA championship game. It was played in a vast dome, but for those watching, the memory is of a single shot, a calm jumper from the left wing. Jordan's basket sealed North Carolina's victory, etching his name into history before he had even left college. Yet even this defining instant carried no thunder in his own heart. Years later, he would reflect on it with humility, remembering not just the shot, but the quiet preparation that had led him to that point. Life at Chapel Hill was not solely defined by the game. Jordan's friends and classmates remember a young man who loved to laugh, who had a mischievous streak, and who enjoyed the ordinary pleasures of campus life. Long walks, simple meals, and evenings spent in the company of peers shaped his days as much as basketball did. For a listener drifting towards sleep, these details matter just as much as the games themselves. They remind us that greatness begins not with glory, but with ordinary hours spent in familiar places. By his junior year, Jordan had grown into both his body and his game. He had become stronger, faster, more confident, yet still grounded by the lessons of his coach. He learned to wait for the right pass, to value the quiet assist as much as the spectacular dunk, and to see the beauty in team play. Those were the principles Dean Smith instilled, that the measure of a player was not only what he did alone, but what he made possible for others. And so, the story of Jordan at North Carolina is not one of endless triumphs or constant excitement. Rather, it is the story of a young man finding his rhythm in the slow, steady cadence of college life. A place where patience was valued, where the lessons of discipline took root, and where, in the stillness of late-night practice, the faint outlines of a legend began to emerge. The first retirement and baseball years. There are moments in every great life story where the path suddenly bends, where decisions surprise even the closest observers, and where the journey takes on an entirely new rhythm. In the quiet autumn of 1993, the world of basketball held its breath as Michael Jordan, widely considered to be the best to ever play the game, announced he was stepping away. The courts that had echoed with his name fell silent, and the story of his life drifted toward an unexpected chapter, one that would take him far from the roaring arenas of the NBA, into the hushed fields of baseball diamonds, a sport he had loved long before his basketball superstardom. It is important for us who listen in the stillness of night to slow down here, to pause and consider how this moment must have felt. Imagine being at the very peak of your career, having conquered the game you love, with 3 consecutive NBA championships secured. The press, the fans, the opponents, all expecting more. And then suddenly you step away. For Jordan, it was not just about leaving basketball. It was about searching for peace, for meaning, and perhaps even for a return to the comfort of childhood dreams. The decision did not emerge in a vacuum. Michael's father, James Jordan, had always been a guiding presence in his life, someone who offered quiet encouragement through triumph and struggle alike. It was James who had first nurtured Michael's love of sports, who had gently placed a bat in his hands when he was still a boy, and who had cheered from the sidelines during his earliest competitions. When James was tragically killed in the summer of 1993, the loss struck deep into Michael's heart. His father had often spoken about how much he believed his son could have been a professional baseball player had he pursued that path instead of basketball. In the silence of grief, those words lingered. And so, in October of that year, Jordan announced he would step away from basketball. His press conference was measured, deliberate, and tinged with an exhaustion that spoke louder than any words. The sports world reacted with disbelief. How could a man at the height of his abilities simply stop? But to Michael, the question was not about skill or trophies. It was about following the voice of his father, honoring a memory, and perhaps testing whether his talents could shine on another kind of field. The decision carried him not into the roaring lights of major league stadiums, but to the patient work of the minor leagues. Jordan signed a contract with the Chicago White Sox organization, and he was placed with the Birmingham Barons, a Double-A affiliate team. It was here, in small southern ballparks, that the next stage of his story unfolded. Far from the crowded arenas of the NBA, Jordan found himself traveling on long bus rides, wearing a different kind of uniform, and learning once again to be a student of the game. For many, this period is remembered as a curiosity, a detour in an otherwise flawless career. But if we slow our minds, if we step into the calmness of the moment, we see something more profound. Imagine Michael Jordan, who had been treated as a larger-than-life figure, sitting quietly on a bus seat, his legs folded awkwardly in the cramped space, just another player among many. Picture the stillness of early morning practices, the rhythm of cleats on dirt, the sharp crack of a bat against ball. All sounds far gentler than the roar of a basketball crowd, but no less meaningful. The challenge was immense. Baseball is not a sport that bends easily to raw athleticism. Its demands are subtler: timing, patience, the delicate balance of vision and instinct. Michael struggled at first. His batting average was low, his swing uncertain, and critics questioned the wisdom of his decision. But to those who watched closely, there were flashes of promise. His speed on the base paths, his relentless work ethic, his refusal to give less than his best. Teammates spoke of his humility, how he showed up every day with the seriousness of a rookie, not the ego of a global superstar. The spring of 1994 brought him to the Arizona Fall League, where the desert air was dry and the evenings carried a cool stillness. Here, Jordan began to improve, his swing loosening, his comfort growing. Coaches remarked that, had he given more years to the game, he might well have carved out a real place in baseball. But time, as always, was moving forward, and fate would eventually call him back to the sport that had made him immortal. Still, these baseball years are more than just a side note. They remind us that even the greatest of us are human, shaped by love and loss, pulled by memories and the quiet voices of those who came before. In the gentleness of night, when the world is hushed, it is worth reflecting on this truth, that Michael Jordan, who seemed at times more myth than man, once chose to step away from glory to chase the dream of his father. By the spring of 1995, whispers of a return to basketball grew louder. The Chicago Bulls had struggled without him, and the game itself seemed to ache for his presence. The announcement, when it came, was simple, just 2 words: "I'm back." With those words, The story of his baseball years ended, and the next chapter of basketball dominance began. But before we leave this part of his journey, let us rest here a little longer. Let us picture the quiet ballparks, the long shadows cast by the evening sun across the diamond, the slow pace of minor league games where time itself seems to stretch. These images, so far removed from the dazzling lights of the NBA, carry their own kind of peace. They remind us that even heroes must sometimes step away, to breathe, to grieve, and to remember the dreams of childhood. In the soft stillness of night, Michael Jordan's baseball years become less about statistics and more about humanity. They show us a man searching, healing, and honoring the memory of the father who once tossed him a baseball in the yard. And as we drift towards sleep, we can carry with us this quiet truth, that greatness is not only measured in victories, but also in the courage to walk a different path, even if only for a while. The Return to Greatness, script. The story of Michael Jordan is often remembered as a series of shining highlights, soaring dunks, clutch shots, and trophy after trophy raised into the air. But tucked quietly within the flow of his career lies one of the most surprising chapters, a period of departure, reflection, and then a return so profound it became its own legend. This chapter is not about dramatic buzzer beaters or championship parades. Instead, it is about rhythm, patience, and the quiet resilience of someone who found a way back to what he loved, even after stepping away. When Jordan first retired from basketball in 1993, it seemed unthinkable. Fans were left blinking in disbelief. How could the most famous player in the world, at the peak of his career, walk away? He had led the Chicago Bulls to 3 championships in a row, cemented himself as the face of the sport, and carried basketball into the global spotlight. Yet the reasons were deeply personal. The sudden passing of his father, James Jordan, weighed heavily on him. For Michael, life had always been more than points scored and games won. It was about connection, family, and inner peace. In the months that followed his retirement, Jordan turned to something unexpected: baseball. It was a sport deeply tied to his father, who had long dreamed of seeing his son on a diamond instead of a court. And so Michael tried it, not as a publicity stunt, but as a genuine pursuit. He signed with the Birmingham Barons, a minor league team in the Chicago White Sox system, and quietly put on a new uniform. The stands were filled with curious fans, and reporters followed his every move, but the pace of the game was slower, gentler, and demanded a different patience than basketball. What many forget is how committed he was to the craft. While his numbers did not shine, Jordan's work ethic did. He trained early, stayed late, and treated his time in baseball with the same seriousness he gave to basketball. His teammates often said he carried himself with humility, never demanding special treatment despite his fame. For the first time in years, Jordan was a student again, learning, struggling, and absorbing lessons from a sport that tested him in unfamiliar ways. Time moved slowly during that year, almost as if he had stepped into a different rhythm of life. Instead of roaring arenas and bright lights, there were small ballparks, long bus rides, and quiet evenings. For some, it may have looked like a step down. But for Michael, it was a form of healing. The repetitive motions of baseball, the steady crack of a bat, the shuffle of cleats on dirt, the hum of a summer crowd, were soothing. Yet as the seasons turned, so too did Michael's heart. Basketball had not left him, even as he tried to leave it. He would practice in secret gyms, scrimmage with friends, and feel the old pull of the game. The court was his first home, and in time, he found he wanted to return. In March of 1995, the announcement came quietly, almost understated. Just 2 simple words: "I'm back." There was no press conference filled with grand gestures, just a fax sent to the media, and suddenly, Michael Jordan was once again a Chicago Bull. For fans, it was like waking from a dream. The greatest player alive was returning, not as a new hero, but as an older, perhaps slightly more vulnerable version of himself. When he stepped onto the court again, the atmosphere was electric, yet his play was not immediately the same. After months away, his timing was off. His body had adjusted to baseball movements, and the basketball world had not stood still in his absence. Younger players were rising, and the game was evolving. But Jordan's very presence still carried weight. The Bulls, who had struggled to maintain dominance after his retirement, suddenly found new life. They did not win the championship that season, but they reclaimed something almost as important: belief. Jordan's return signaled that the story was not over. The following year, 1995-96, became one of the most remarkable in NBA history. With Jordan fully back in rhythm, the Bulls set a record for wins in a season: 72 victories and only 10 losses. The team, now featuring not only Jordan but also Scottie Pippen and the newly acquired Dennis Rodman, became a juggernaut. The season rolled forward with a sense of inevitability, yet Jordan himself played with a calm precision rather than youthful recklessness. His game had matured. He no longer relied purely on athleticism but leaned on experience, footwork, and intelligence. There is something soothing about this stage of his career. Gone was the constant chase to prove himself. He had already proven everything. Now it was about balance. Balancing the grief he carried, the lessons learned from baseball, and the responsibility of leading a team once more. Watching Jordan in those years was like observing an artist who no longer rushed his brush strokes, but instead painted with patience and intention. That year ended with another championship, the first since his return. For fans, it was not just about winning, it was about seeing Michael Jordan whole again. The victory symbolized resilience, the ability to step away, falter, and then find strength to return stronger than before. The years that followed carried their own rhythm. More championships came, each one a reaffirmation of his greatness. But the gentle truth lies not only in the trophies, but in the quiet persistence behind them. Jordan had faced a turning point where he could have stayed away, forever a retired icon. Instead, he chose to re-enter the flow of the game, to lace his shoes once more, and to give basketball the last chapters of his prime. For those listening tonight, the story of his return is not just about sport. It is about the times in life when we step away, whether by choice or by force, and then find our way back to what matters. The pauses, the detours, the seasons spent in quiet reflection, all of them have their place. And sometimes when the moment is right, a simple whisper, "I'm back," is enough to begin again. As this chapter closes, imagine the sound of a ball bouncing gently on hardwood. Not in the middle of a roaring stadium, but in an empty gym. A soft echo in a quiet space. That sound is both familiar and calming, steady like a heartbeat. It is the sound of return, of rhythm rediscovered, and of someone once again at peace with what they were born to do. And so, the story of Michael Jordan's return reminds us, greatness does not always mean constant ascent. Sometimes it means stepping back, resting, and then with quiet determination, finding your way forward again. The championships and the legacy of the 1990s. Script. The 1990s in the National Basketball Association became almost synonymous with one man's name: Michael Jordan. The quiet boy from Wilmington who once worried about being cut from his high school team had, by this decade, become the most recognizable athlete on earth. Yet in telling this story, we will not dwell on the rush of last-second shots or the frenzy of roaring stadiums. Instead, let us look at this stretch of time through a gentler lens, as if we were paging through an old scrapbook late at night, listening to the soft crackle of a fireplace, noticing the details of daily life that surrounded Jordan's championships. It was a time when basketball was not only a sport, but also a shared ritual. Families gathered in living rooms around bulky television sets, their soft glow illuminating the furniture. In Chicago, the air on game nights seemed to hum with quiet anticipation as neighbors spoke about little else. Even those who had never bounced a ball found themselves knowing the rhythms of the Bulls' season. For Jordan, however, these years carried an unusual weight. Each victory brought admiration, yes, but also expectation. Each season began with questions whispered by journalists and fans alike. Could he do it again? Would he lead Chicago once more to the summit? In reflecting on these years, one notices the slow and steady nature of the Bulls' success. Nothing in sport, not even the most dazzling highlight, lasts forever. But patterns do. And the Bulls' pattern was calm, almost methodical dominance. From 1991 through 1993, and again from 1996 through 1998, they captured 6 championships in 8 years. To the casual viewer, it may have seemed like magic. Yet behind the scenes, life unfolded in simple, steady ways. Jordan practiced with almost monk-like regularity, repeating familiar drills, lacing his shoes in the same order, finding comfort in ritual. The press of fame became its own sort of daily environment. Each hotel lobby became a quiet maze of autograph seekers. Each restaurant dinner, no matter how private, brought curious eyes. Yet Jordan found balance where he could, in rounds of golf under the wide sky, in moments spent with his children, in the steady friendships that anchored him amid the storm. It is worth pausing here, for these details are often lost when recounting dynasties. The truth is that greatness is not only forged in the games themselves, but in the ordinary evenings when one learns to rest, to recover, and to begin again the next morning. As the championships accumulated, so too did the Bulls' place in cultural memory. The red jerseys with bold black trim became icons in themselves, familiar even to those outside of America. School children imitated Jordan's fadeaway shot on playground blacktops, and his jersey was worn across continents. Sports stores sold sneakers that people lined up overnight to purchase, standing under the stars until the doors opened at dawn. These small rituals, watching, waiting, imitating, were part of the championship's legacy, quiet threads woven into daily life. We must remember also the presence of teammates, for Jordan's story in the 1990s was not his alone. Scottie Pippen, with his calm consistency, provided balance. Dennis Rodman, with his unusual energy, brought rebounding that often shifted the game's rhythm. Coaches and trainers, often unseen, worked quietly in the background, stitching together strategies and tending to weary muscles. The championships were the result of this whole network of people, and in their shared effort lies a gentler truth. Success is never only the tale of a single star. Looking back now, with decades of distance, the championships feel less like dramatic contests and more like seasons in nature. Each year began anew, like spring, filled with possibility. The playoffs carried the intensity of summer. Victory in June brought the crispness of autumn as the season closed and fans reflected, and the winter months, when the games paused, became a time of rest before the cycle began again. Jordan's 1990s championships followed this rhythm, a reminder that even in the realm of extraordinary achievement, life still moves with the steady turn of seasons. Perhaps the most enduring aspect of the 1990s Bulls lies not in the numbers or trophies, but in the way Jordan's play became part of ordinary memory. People remember where they were when they watched his game-winning shots. They remember the feel of the sofa, the clink of a snack bowl, the familiar chatter of family members in the background. These sensory details, tucked gently into the corners of memory, are what transform championships into something larger than sport. They become part of the story of a household, a neighborhood, a city. And so, when we speak of Michael Jordan's legacy of the 1990s, we can choose to see it not only in highlights replayed on screens, but also in the quiet human moments that surrounded them. A father explaining a rule of the game to his son, a grandmother smiling at the excitement in her living room, a young fan sketching the Bulls logo in the margins of a school notebook. These fragments, when gathered together, form a tapestry that is as calming as it is inspiring. Jordan's championships were not thunderclaps, but steady chimes, marking the passage of time in an unforgettable decade. As we close this chapter, imagine yourself resting back as though the 1990s were unfolding once again. The soft glow of the television flickers in a darkened room, faint laughter drifts from a nearby kitchen, and outside, the city of Chicago sleeps peacefully under its wide sky. Inside, the Bulls play on, their movements rhythmic, their success inevitable, their story destined to be retold not only in statistics, but in the soothing cadence of memory. The Final Triumphs script. As the 1990s moved toward their close, the legend of Michael Jordan was no longer confined to the basketball court. He was not merely an athlete who scored points or collected trophies. He had become a symbol, a presence, a figure woven into the collective imagination of people across the world. By the time he returned from his first retirement and led the Chicago Bulls into a new era of dominance, the atmosphere around him carried a mixture of inevitability and reverence. Viewers didn't just wonder if he would succeed, they often assumed it, as though greatness had become an unshakable habit. This chapter drifts into those final years with the Bulls, where Jordan's story crystallized into its most iconic form. The games themselves unfolded in crowded arenas filled with roaring fans, yet when we remember them now, they seem slowed down, almost dreamlike. The sound of the ball bouncing, the echo of sneakers sliding across polished wood, and the soft swish of the net. These became the quiet punctuation marks of a career already inscribed in sporting history. And yet, Jordan's final triumphs were not simply about athletic mastery. They carried something deeper, the sense of closing a circle, of finishing a journey that had begun in small gyms and family driveways decades earlier. To watch him play in those last championship runs was to see a man balancing the intensity of competition with the maturity of perspective. Each basket, each defensive stand, seemed almost meditative, a deliberate act of mastery rather than a desperate chase for victory. The 1996 season marked a particularly remarkable moment in his career. Having returned from retirement, Jordan and the Bulls compiled a 72-10 regular season record, a mark that stood for decades as a symbol of near perfection. The accomplishment was as much about patience and cohesion as it was about Jordan's own brilliance. Alongside Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman, and a cast of dedicated role players, Jordan orchestrated the team's efforts with a calm yet commanding presence. If one listens closely to the stories of that season, they often emphasize the way Jordan slowed down the game. Even in moments of tension, he seemed unhurried, as though he carried within him a quiet awareness of how events would unfold. That sense of inevitability was not arrogance, but mastery, the ability to trust his instincts, honed over years of repetition. The championship that year was a triumphant statement. Jordan was not merely returning, he was returning to reclaim, to reassert, and to complete what he had begun. For fans, it was as though time itself had folded in on itself, reuniting them with the rhythm of earlier seasons, yet offering something richer, the return of a champion tempered by reflection. The following 2 seasons added layers to this unfolding story. In 1997, the Bulls once again marched toward the finals, where they faced the Utah Jazz, a team led by John Stockton and Karl Malone. These contests were not dramatic in the cinematic sense of last-second desperation. Instead, they were methodical, deliberate, and precise, like 2 great chess players moving pieces with quiet concentration. Perhaps the most remembered moment came during Game 5 of the 1997 Finals, later immortalized as the flu game. Jordan, visibly weakened, pale, and sweating, still managed to carry his team to victory, scoring 38 points despite struggling with illness. What stood out most, though, was not the drama of the moment but the gentleness of his perseverance. His effort was not reckless but carefully measured. a reminder that even in weakness there is strength, and that mastery often reveals itself in subtle resilience rather than sheer force. In the stillness of that memory, one can picture Jordan leaning on teammates for support, his face weary, yet his focus unbroken. It is a scene less about domination and more about endurance, the quiet dignity of continuing even when the body resists. For those who remember it, the game was not a thrilling contest, but a contemplative lesson in persistence. The final season of the Bulls dynasty, in 1998, unfolded almost like a farewell performance, though no one could say for certain at the time. The team carried the air of inevitability once again, yet beneath it was a subtle tension. Not the frantic tension of a cliffhanger, but the gentle awareness that an ending was near. Every game seemed to stretch slightly longer, as though the world itself wanted to linger in that golden twilight. Fans leaned into their screens, aware they were watching history not only in sport, but in narrative, as though a great story was composing its final chapter before their eyes. The culmination came, fittingly, in Game 6 of the 1998 NBA Finals against the Utah Jazz. With seconds remaining and the Bulls trailing, Jordan stole the ball from Malone, dribbled deliberately to the right side of the court, and rose for what would be his final shot in a Chicago Bulls uniform. The ball left his fingertips with a smooth, familiar arc, a gesture that seemed almost timeless, as though drawn not from the urgency of the moment, but from years of practiced grace. The shot fell, the Bulls won, and with that, Jordan closed the book on his era with Chicago. The image of his final shot has lingered in the minds of fans, not because it was dramatic, but because it was inevitable, calm, and beautifully complete. Like the final brushstroke on a painting, it carried with it the sense that nothing more needed to be said. In reflecting on those final triumphs, it is worth noticing that the games themselves are not remembered simply for the scores or statistics. They are remembered as moments of stillness, where mastery was expressed in its most distilled form. For those watching, it was as though Jordan was not merely playing but teaching, showing the world what it meant to approach one's craft with patience, persistence, and grace. The championships of 1996, 1997, and 1998 now exist in memory less as victories and more as meditations on excellence. Each of them, in their own quiet way, contributed to the feeling that Jordan's career was not just a sequence of games, but a carefully composed story, unfolding at the steady pace of a master storyteller. When the confetti fell in 1998 and the Bulls celebrated their 6th championship, the arena filled with sound and color. Yet when we look back, the moment feels strangely hushed, almost peaceful, like a candle slowly dimming at the end of a long evening. It was a moment not of fireworks but of closure, a gentle, deliberate conclusion to a story that had defined an era. Return to greatness. The second three-peat. When the quiet of evening settles and the world outside softens into shadows, it is a fine time to remember a remarkable chapter in the life of Michael Jordan. By this point in his journey, he had already achieved what most athletes only dare to dream of: championships, fame, and a reputation that seemed untouchable. And yet, what makes Jordan's story uniquely compelling is not only his successes, but the rhythm of leaving, returning, and reshaping what people thought was possible. After his first retirement in 1993 and a surprising venture into baseball, Jordan's return to basketball in 1995 seemed at first uncertain. His body had changed, and his rhythm with the game had to be rediscovered. But by the time the 1995 and 1996 season dawned, the doubts were giving way to something extraordinary. The Chicago Bulls, with Jordan back in his familiar number 23 jersey, began to move with a harmony that would echo through basketball history. The team roster seemed built like an intricate clock, each gear turning in perfect time. Alongside Jordan were Scottie Pippen, ever loyal and versatile, and Dennis Rodman, whose unrelenting energy on defense and rebounding was a spectacle of its own. Together, Under coach Phil Jackson's calm, Zen-like leadership, they formed a unit that was not merely strong, but deeply balanced. The 1995-1996 Bulls season became the stuff of legend, with a record-setting 72 wins. Night after night, Jordan played not with reckless energy, but with a measured confidence, as though each movement had been considered before it even happened. The pace of his game slowed from the explosive leaps of his youth into something more precise, more thoughtful, yet still unstoppable. For fans, this era of Jordan's career was a gift. He was no longer simply the young athlete defying gravity. He was now a master craftsman, carving victory from the smallest opportunities. Watching him was like listening to a musician who had once dazzled with speed, now drawing beauty from patience and subtlety. The playoffs that season carried with them the weight of expectation, and the Bulls did not falter. They moved past the Miami Heat and then faced the Orlando Magic, the team that had defeated them the previous year. This time, there was no hesitation. Jordan led the Bulls with quiet determination, sweeping Orlando and erasing any memory of past shortcomings. The 1996 NBA Finals were against the Seattle Supersonics, a team full of strength and energy. The Sonics, with Gary Payton's fierce defense, challenged Jordan in ways that tested his endurance. But Jordan's presence on the court was like an immovable current. The Bulls captured the championship in 6 games, completing one of the most dominant seasons in basketball history. For Jordan, that championship carried personal weight as well. It was won on Father's Day, 3 years after the loss of his father. In the quiet moments after the game, Jordan knelt on the locker room floor, overwhelmed with emotion. It was one of the few times fans saw the private man beneath the public legend, and it revealed how deeply human his journey truly was. The following years, 1997 and 1998, brought more challenges but also more triumphs. The Bulls' opponents grew hungrier, defenses grew tighter, and Jordan himself faced the strain of age and fatigue. But even so, he adapted again and again. He no longer relied on youthful leaps. Instead, his fadeaway jump shot became a signature move, nearly impossible to defend. In the 1997 Finals, against the Utah Jazz, Jordan battled not only his opponents, but his own body. In Game 5, weakened by illness, he pushed through exhaustion to score 38 points. It became known as the flu game, though some would later suggest it was food poisoning. Regardless of the cause, the image of Jordan barely standing, leaning on Scottie Pippen for support, became an enduring symbol of his willpower. The Bulls won the series, earning Jordan his 5th championship. The victory did not come with fanfare or dramatics, but with a sense of inevitability, as though Jordan had simply willed it into being. In 1998, the Bulls once again found themselves facing the Utah Jazz in the finals. The series was grueling, marked by physical play and close scores. But in the final moments of Game 6, Jordan delivered one of the most famous plays in basketball history. With the clock ticking down, he stole the ball from Karl Malone, dribbled calmly up the court, and with a single graceful motion, sank a jump shot over Brian Russell. The Bulls secured their 6th championship in 8 years, and Jordan's legacy was sealed. That final shot has been described endlessly in sports broadcasts and highlight reels. Yet in the context of our gentle reflection, it can be seen not as a dramatic exclamation, but as the quiet closing of a chapter. It was the stroke of an artist signing his name one last time on a canvas he had filled with unforgettable images. As the 1990s came to a close, Jordan stepped away from the game once more. This time, it felt like the end. 6 championships, 2 three-peats, and countless memories left fans with the sense that they had witnessed not only greatness, but the rare beauty of a career completed with symmetry and balance. The second three-peat was not simply a sequence of victories. It was a demonstration of growth, resilience, and mastery. Jordan, The player who had once astounded with sheer physical gifts had transformed into a strategist, a leader, and an anchor for his team. His journey during these years reflected the simple truth that greatness is not just about beginning strong, but about enduring, adapting, and finishing with grace. For those who drift into sleep while hearing these stories, it is comforting to remember that even the most extraordinary lives are lived in stages. The energy of youth, the mastery of maturity, and the peace of completion all play their part. And for Michael Jordan, those stages came together to form a story that continues to inspire long after the final buzzer. As you rest now, imagine the soft echo of sneakers on polished hardwood, the gentle swish of the net, and the rhythm of a game played to perfection. Each sound, each motion, is like a lullaby from another time, steady, measured, and complete. And with that, we close the book on Jordan's second three-peat, a chapter that speaks not only to basketball, but to the art of resilience, balance, and the quiet beauty of closing circles, the gentle fade of a legend. The story of Michael Jordan, like any human life, is not only one of triumphs and moments of brilliance, but also of quiet departures. It is often the ending of stories that lingers longest in the heart, for it leaves behind an echo that continues to resonate. Tonight, as we reach the conclusion of this gentle series, we explore the later years of Jordan's life, his gradual step away from the spotlight of the court, his shifting role in the world of basketball, and the quieter dimensions of his personal legacy. Let us begin in the calm of the late 1990s, when the energy of Chicago, once driven by the pulse of its championship runs, began to soften into reflection. After the Bulls' sixth title in 1998, the team fractured, and with it ended an era that had defined not only basketball, but global sports culture. Jordan himself retired once more, stepping away at what many believed would be the final curtain call. But his absence was never absolute. Like an old melody that surfaces unexpectedly, he lingered in the public's imagination. People spoke his name the way one recalls a favorite story, fondly, gently, with the recognition that greatness once stood among them. For Jordan, retirement was not only a departure from the court, but also the beginning of a new journey, one not measured by points and championships, but by influence and quiet stewardship. He became involved with the Washington Wizards in an executive role. There, he shifted from player to advisor, trying to shape the direction of a new team. And yet, the call of the game was not so easily silenced. By 2001, Jordan once more laced up his shoes, returning to the court for 2 more seasons. This return was not about reclaiming dominance. Instead, it reflected a man's enduring love for the game, a desire to pass on knowledge to younger teammates, and perhaps a longing to feel the rhythm of basketball one last time. These years, though quieter, remind us that greatness is not only measured by victory. It is also defined by humility, by the willingness to continue sharing one's gifts even when the peak of performance has passed. Jordan, in his 40s, did not soar as he once had. But his presence remained commanding, his leadership unmistakable. He became, in a sense, a bridge between eras, connecting the memory of his golden years with the new generation who grew up watching him. As time moved on, the game shifted without him. Younger players rose to stardom, and the NBA entered new phases of style and culture. Jordan, however, remained the eternal reference point, the yardstick by which all others were measured. Yet outside of comparisons and statistics, his personal life gained new depth. He stepped into roles as a businessman, as a philanthropist, and eventually, as the owner of the Charlotte Hornets. Ownership is different from playing. It requires patience, vision, and an acceptance that influence is exercised less through action and more through guidance. Jordan approached this with the same determination he once brought to the court. He invested not only in the business of basketball, but also in causes that resonated with his values. Over the years, he supported hospitals, educational programs, and relief efforts, choosing to give back quietly rather than with grand displays. As he moved further into the 21st century, Jordan became a symbol not only of past glory, but also of continuity. His name was woven into conversations of culture, sneakers, and even art. The Air Jordan brand endured across generations, making his legacy visible on city streets, in gyms, and in the quiet corners of people's lives. His influence, like a soft background rhythm, persisted whether or not he was in the spotlight. And yet, perhaps what is most striking about Jordan in his later years is the way his story mirrors the arc of life itself. There is the vibrancy of youth, the blaze of success, the trials of transition, and finally, the steadying calm of maturity. In interviews, Jordan has reflected more on meaning than on competition. He speaks of family, of balance, of the simplicity of enjoying time away from the pressures of expectation. The image of Jordan now is not one of perpetual motion, but of stillness. He sits courtside at games, a quiet observer of the sport he once defined. His gaze carries both memory and wisdom, as if he sees not only the play before him, but the echoes of past moments intertwined with it. In considering his legacy, it is easy to be drawn toward statistics, the 6 championships, the scoring titles, the MVP awards. But history is not merely a record of numbers. It is the feeling that remains, the memory carried forward in the minds of those who lived it. For Jordan, his legacy is just as much the way he inspired a child to pick up a basketball in a driveway, or the way he demonstrated discipline through hours of practice, or the way his calm presence continues to remind us of what dedication can achieve. And so, as the night deepens and we reflect on his journey, let us think of Jordan not as a mythic figure of unstoppable force, but as a man whose story unfolded with both brilliance and humanity. His career may be immortalized, but his essence lies in the quiet truths, the love of a game, the acceptance of time's passage, and the graceful stepping aside to let new voices rise. As the years continue, Jordan's story will fade into the broader fabric of history, joining countless other tales of those who shaped their time. But in the soft glow of memory, his image remains steady, a reminder that greatness is not a single act, but a lifetime of moments, each lived with intention. And now, as this chapter draws to a close, imagine the calm of a dimly lit room where a basketball rests silently on a shelf. The echoes of cheers have long since faded, but the object itself remains, holding within it the memory of games once played. It is in this stillness that Jordan's story continues, not in the roar of the crowd, but in the quiet remembrance of all that he gave. Let us leave him there, in that tranquil space of legacy, knowing that his journey, like all stories, will live on not just in history books, but in the hearts and imaginations of those who find inspiration in his life. And with that, dear listener, allow your thoughts to drift softly away, like the final notes of a song fading into silence.